Welcome, everyone. Happy Thursday, morning, afternoon, evening. Maybe it's Friday where you are. Thank you so much for joining us today for another marvelous Power to Fly Chat and Learn event. My name is Meg Alexander. I'm going to be your host today. And before we dive in, I just want to go over a couple real quick housekeeping items, especially useful if maybe this is your first Power to Fly event, in which case, welcome. We're so happy to meet you. Or maybe if you haven't joined us for an event in a while. So just to brush you up, in case you weren't maybe aware, all of our events are about you. They're about our community members, and we want to make sure that you all get the most out of this time that you spend with Power to Fly. So since you're here with us live, we want to encourage y'all to make the most of this time. You can participate in a couple different ways, entirely up to your own comfort level. You can turn your cameras on if you would like to share your smiling, maskless faces with us safely. No pressure to look Instagram perfect, y'all. I got all gussied up for a concert last night, so you're looking at last night's curls. So please, if you are coming to us from a non-traditional workspace, if you've got furry coworkers supervising you, if you have a child supervisor who is very intent that you eat your standard quota of Cheerios this morning, whatever you got going on, please bring it. We would love to see it. Now, if you have any kind of privacy concerns or anything, totally understandable. As long as you don't come off mute during today's session, you will not show up on either the live stream or the recording. Now, you can still participate in a couple different ways. If you have questions or comments for the speakers, please feel free to share those in the Zoom group chat. You can also connect with your fellow attendees there if you'd like. I'll also be sharing links in there throughout the intro and during the event to places where you can join our talent community. If you want to get more info on CDW, whatever you'd like, I'll be sharing some info in the chat there as well. If you have a question or a comment that you'd like to have me raise, but you want to be kept anonymous, not a problem, just DM it to me instead of sending it to the whole group. And like I did say earlier, today's session is being recorded. Now, what that means for all of you is that you get to kick back and relax. You get to enjoy the fantastic advice and expertise and experiences that our guests are going to share with you today. And then you will also get to, kind of be able to check back and, not have to worry if you maybe missed a list item 2 of 5, or you couldn't quite catch that last resource that someone mentioned. Now, how that's going to work is in about 1 to 2 business days, we're going to email you, so it'll be early next week. Everybody that registered for today's event is going to get an email from us with a link to where you can rewatch this recording on powertofly.com when it gets posted there. However, let's say that Tara or Cecelia has something just mind-blowing. You cannot wait to share it with a coworker or friend or a relative. You do not have to wait the 1 to 2 business days. You can always head over to our YouTube channel. I'll share the link to that in the chat thread in just a little bit here. The live stream, we're live streaming there right now. So hi, YouTube. And we will also have this live stream is usually posted on that channel within about 5 to 15 minutes at the end of the event. Now, you can search our entire library of recorded chats on our website. You can also search a large chunk of them on that YouTube channel as well. So definitely great places to go back to see, see more of this chat or check out what other events that we've had going on. I definitely recommend, if you are interested, we are at Power to Fly on a ton of platforms. We are at Power to Fly on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. If you would like to, you are very welcome and encouraged to take photos or video as we go, share it out to your social network. We would love to, feel free to tag us. We would love to repost or reshare anything y'all post up. Anything that we can do to grow our community and really spread the awareness and the availability of these free resources to as many people as possible. So please feel free to, let people know that you're learning with Power to Fly, because we'd love to support that. Now, as we go on into our session today, I just want to highlight that our guests are here on behalf of CVCDW. Now, we've been lucky enough to partner with CVCDW for a little while now, but in case you've never heard of them, or maybe if you just don't have a ton of familiarity with the company, what you're looking at now is their company page on powertofly.com. Now, I'm going to share this link with y'all in the chat too, so you can take a look at it. But what you need to know when you get to this page is you want to take a look at, they've got their about information, so you can learn more about the company. You can take a look at their open roles. There are a ton posted right now. And it is a super great way to make sure that you can get not only like great information about the company, but like we also have a library of our past events where CDW has participated. So if you are lining yourself up and prepping for like a job interview or something, that is a great resource to check in and see what the company's been up to lately. Or a great way to say, like, hey, I saw that Tara and Cecelia were on this chat the other day. I really liked it. It obviously is going to put you kind of head and shoulders above the rest of people because you have a great reference to refer to when you're in that interview. Now, if you are looking actively for a job and CDW is interesting to you, but you don't see anything currently posted that really suits you, I recommend that at the top right-hand corner of that page, on their page on company page on powertofly.com, there is going to be a big pink button that says follow. I recommend clicking that button. It does some great things for you, but effectively what it does is it works like your friend at CDW. So it's going to let the CDW team know that you are interested in working with them even before you fill out an application. But it's also going to make sure that you stay up to date when CDW posts new roles. So anything that we can do to kind of, take some of the repetition or the tedium out of job searching, we would love to do for you. So like I said, clicking that button, it keeps you on CDW's radar, but it also keeps CDW on your radar. Also a very helpful feature that I've used before when I was still job searching was to follow companies that I wanted to kind of check back in with later when I was actively seeking employment. So it's a great feature no matter what brings you to Power to Fly. Now, I'm really excited to introduce you to today's speakers. So first up, we have Tara. Now, Tara is joining us as Vice President of... So sorry, y'all. Let's check that out again. So Tara is here on behalf of CDW. She's the Vice President of Integrated Technology Orchestration for CDW. Now, in that position, she's responsible for the development, management, and governance of CDW. Now, Tara is also an executive sponsor of the Brave Business Resource Group, which is focused on equity for LGBTQ plus coworkers, and an active sponsor for CDW's Women's Opportunity Network, which helps to advance the careers of women in IT through mentoring, facilitated networking, and formal leadership training. Now, Tara is also, and as if this weren't enough, the chief steward of the CDW Strava Club, where you can join and follow along with our monthly focus and friendly competition. My husband is obsessed with Strava. It's kind of, in case you've never done it before, it's sort of like video games meet exercise. You can race bicycles. There's a bunch of pro riders that also go in there and race. You can jump in a pack with somebody like, I don't think he's ever done Jens Voigt. There was somebody else that hopped on for a ride and he was all excited, even though bro left him in the dust after about 30 seconds. But absolutely so cool. Tara, thank you for sharing those interests with us. Is there anything else you would like to share with our audience before we keep going?
Yeah, you asked earlier, Megan, I'm happy to be here. I would say that in line with the power of adaptability, I have three basically adult children. The youngest is still in college. And in addition to my own career, helping them sort of navigate this employment landscape and what's happening for them in their mid-20s as they kind of think about adaptability of some of the skills they've acquired and then how to apply those. So I think it'll be fun, and maybe I'll even have a story or two from that to share today.
Oh man, I so much respect to parents of teenagers. I do not know how my parents did it. Y'all are excellent, not only at multitasking, but also at like holding down the fort. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, Tara. Now, Tara is going to be joined in conversation with Cecelia Myers. Now, Cecelia is the Vice President of Digital at CDW, and she leads CDW's product management, design, demand gen, customer integrations, and merchandising teams. Now, prior to CDW, Cecelia led product and design teams at Groupon, and before that, she had co-founded a venture-backed startup called Cake Style as a founder in residence at Sandbox Industries. Now, Cecelia is also a lymphoma survivor, and she leads several charity initiatives with the Lymphoma Research Foundation, as well as being a mentor angel with Immerman Angels. Cecelia, so happy to have you join us today. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to share with our audience?
Thanks, Meg. Yeah, I'm also an active one member alongside Tara. I forgot to put that one in there. So very involved in that BRG, and it's a really, really great one for representing women at CDW. Otherwise, like Tara, I have a lot of stories of adaptability in my own life. I have a 3-year-old son, which is a everyday adaptability challenge at that age. And so, yeah, lots to share about kind of balancing adapting career, adapting family, adapting personally. So really excited about this particular topic. Thank you.
Awesome. Yes. Oh, can't wait to dig in. All right. Last thing before we're going to jump into questions. These are some of the main takeaways you can expect to get from today's event. Now, we came up with these via conversations with Cecelia and Tara, but we also did it after looking at the questions that you all submitted when you registered for this event. So all of that to say, this is going to be what we're going to try and cover today. But if you are here, you took time out of your day to spend with Power to Fly and CDW, we want to make sure that the time that you spend with us is well worth it. So if you have a question that you submitted and you're not sure if we're going to get to it, ask it in the chat. If we're addressing one of your questions and you want to give us a little bit more context or detail, please send it in the chat. Let us know. If somebody, let's say Cecelia has some tip and you want to expand on that, that subject or term they used, let us know in the chat. My whole job is to make sure that your questions get asked and answered. Help me help you do that by letting me know what you want to know. Please understand, y'all have the power to drive today's conversation. So please feel free to take advantage of that. All right, so let's stop our screen share here so we can dive on in to our questions. Now, the first thing that I wanted to talk about today is, kind of understanding how adaptability can be the ultimate key to success. So for people who've maybe never considered adaptability to be a very large focus for them or a soft skill that they have, consciously cultivated, I want to hear from each of you why you think that adaptability is such a, not superpower, but maybe a little bit. Let's see, Tara, would you like to go first?
Sure. Meg, when I read this, I immediately just thought about like the two largest pivots in my career are basically adaptability stories. So very early in my career in the 90s, I worked in the finance department at another internet technology kind of VAR place. And because I was the last person to talk to a customer before their order got out, because I was approving their credit or figuring something out about how they were going to pay for this thing, right? Because computers cost like $3,000 for a laptop back then. It was a big deal, but I had become like the salesperson of choice for these individuals. Then they would just call me to place their order. And their argument was, my orders never get through the system until I talk to you anyway. So I just want to place my orders with you. And I got like a little group of like 36 customers who called me all the time, who I was their salesperson. So I used like that as a pivot, as an like adapting this mathematics background I had to be like, oh, I guess I'm a decent salesperson. Maybe I wasn't. I turned out to be okay as a salesperson, but then I went into the sales department. And then later, more recently, the job I have now I spent over a dozen years working in contracting and capture for CDW. And I got asked to be part of a project team. And again, like getting to learn something new and do something that leveraged a different part of my skill set in that project work made this my confidence level. And we hear all the time the stats about women not applying for jobs unless you meet all their criteria, but it really boosted my confidence level to raise my hand and say, I'd like to do something different for the organization and come work in the services team and be able to do that. And so I think when you think about like ultimate success, I mean, I think I'm mid-career, so hopefully I haven't hit my ultimate success quite yet. But those two things of thinking about how I took skill sets I had and adapted them to a new challenge was really pivotal for me.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Tara. Cecelia, How about you? What role has adaptability played in your success? Why do you think it's so important?
Yeah, I feel like straight out of school, I had to learn to be adaptive because I had an English degree, which is one of those degrees that people say they're useless. They're not. That's not true. They're very valuable in teaching you how to think and communicate and construct an argument, but it is not obvious what career you're going to go into with an English degree unless you're going to be in academia, a teacher, maybe a librarian. You can go to law school. There's a lot of that, but there's kind of some paths people think of, and then there's the potential to really just adapt those skills to a job in the job market. And so what I learned really early on was that I had to be able to articulate what was useful about what I had studied and what things I could bring to the table, but then also understand that I didn't need to necessarily know everything about what I was going to do with my day. Very infrequently do you really know the job you're going to do unless you go a very direct path into something very, very kind of heavily skilled or technical. And I obviously did not do that. So that was an early lesson in adaptability that was nice to learn because it just became normal to just adapt and to learn to kind of tell the story of the things I had experienced in a way that showed the value. And showed, that you don't have to have necessarily even a traditional path to still bring a lot of perspective to the table.
Oh, I love that. As a fellow somewhat useless degree haver, I have a art history degree, mint condition, never been used. But yeah, it's kind of bonkers, right? How like very, very core segments of your college degree or whatever schooling you have can really be useful and applicable in ways that you don't honestly think of. Because you're right, I also went to law school because it was a writing heavy major. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, you do end up with very good written communication skills because it's so heavy into writing, which honestly improves your communication in all aspects, I think. So yeah, I think you're right. It really is about kind of taking a look at where your strengths lie or what was considered a strength in your specific field to see where that can apply. And you're right. I mean, adaptability is huge. Nobody knows what tomorrow's going to bring. If they tell you, they're almost certainly wrong, right? Like the sun will most likely rise. Most likely, it probably always has. But this, you know what I mean? Like none of us really know. So having that adaptability, knowing that the only constant in the world is change, that kind of just seems smart. Yeah, I like it. All right, let's start talking about this idea of change. Now, not everyone is comfortable with change. Some people thrive, some people absolutely hate it. Do you have any advice for people who want to try and get more comfortable with change? Do you think that there's a core place to start? Do you think there are specific soft skills that are the key to doing this? We've got a lot of people chiming in the chat. Julie is saying letting go of control is huge in this adaptability journey. So Cecelia, let's start with you. What is your advice if people are trying to get more comfortable with change?
It's difficult because I think there's always this inherent, almost fight or flight fear of change that you just have to be aware of. And so I think for me, it's starting with that awareness of change is inevitable. You've been through lots of it. You'll navigate it, and also sitting with the discomfort as well and not trying to kind of chase the feeling away or ignore it necessarily as it's there. You just have to kind of live through it. But the other side that I always remind myself of is change is very often opportunity, particularly in the workforce. If you do your job well, if you have value in the organization, change is usually a chance actually for you to expand, to try something new. And so, I've been in a lot of high change organizations. I've led teams through a lot of change. And the thing I always remind people of is this is an opportunity for you. It's okay to be nervous, but stay open and stay flexible because people who did that usually come out ahead.
Excellent advice. Tara, how about you? What do you think is maybe the biggest soft skill that you can develop to help you get more comfortable with change?
I think we sometimes use this phrase inside of assume good intent. You hear that at CDW a lot because I think the problem is change can be scary and people feel like the change is ominous or that it's going to be bad. And so the idea that wherever that change is coming from, I mean, some things are environmental, I suppose the weather, whatnot. But for most things, when we're talking about the concept of what's going on at your company or in your industry, you want to ask the questions sort of respectfully to get to the why if it's not being told to you up front, which I have some different thoughts on, which we'll get to. But this notion of like, okay, there's got to be a reason for this. And I think that calms a lot of people down. I can tell you with some of the people in my own life who are just not great with change, I literally sort of the same stuff that you might find with exercise or diet or other sort of health things. It's like, force yourself to change a little bit, pick something that's very routine for you and intentionally move it. Like if it's really, really uncomfortable for you, as Cecelia said, like getting a little bit outside your comfort zone and be able to sit with it, you start with small things, get yourself comfortable with smaller things, because eventually in your life, there will probably be some bigger things.
Yeah. And I very much liked what y'all said about kind of seeing the opportunity there. Tara, you're absolutely right. Like the thing that came to mind for me is when the pandemic first hit, Power to Fly, we were in the same boat as everybody. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what was going on. And that was one of the best things that I remember experiencing was like how transparent our leadership was about like, hey, here's where we are. We're fine and we'll be fine for this amount of time. Here's the plan that we've got in place. Like, and so it made a lot of the situation so much like less scary, more palatable. It engendered that trust in us. So, so that we knew, not that we didn't trust our leadership before, but, it kind of gives you that extra level. So I completely agree, Tara, start small and have that understanding that like the devil, is not always better than the devil you don't. Right. I feel like that's a lot where people come from because they're like, well, I know this. And even if it sucks, I know it. Right. So when we're trying to foster that adaptability mindset, do you think that, apart from the soft skills, do you think there are things that people can do to help foster that mindset for themselves, maybe outside of change scenarios? You're both looking at me like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Cecelia.
I mean,
Oh,
I
Tara,
still
go
go to
ahead.
the same place. I'll just jump in. I still go to the same place of like, there's a couple of different phrases that we use that pop in my head all the time. Cause one of them was the assume good intent, or like, what would you have to believe to be true? Right. That this is a good thing for me, or that this would work. Right.
Like
and so
what would reassure you kind of thing?
Yeah. What would you have to believe in? And then you can kind of look at that list and go, oh, those things actually are believable. Like, I think that just takes some of the fear or, uncertainty out of it. If you can take those extra steps to think through it, because it's so easy to react. I mean, I react all of the time and then have to walk myself back. But the more you can take the deep breath and think about those things up front, and kind of check your own, like, what am I afraid of? What would I have to believe to be true for this to be a good thing? I have to believe that the people who are making this decision, they believe X, Y, and Z. Do I think that's reasonable and that's possible? Yeah, I do actually. Right. And so you sort of get yourself a little more comfortable.
Do you think, as I'm listening to you, I have a, I thought of a question. Do you think that when these change situations come through, that questioning and that kind of reframing, do you think that is all internal or should all be internal? Do you think there are situations where asking these questions of, the person who is announcing the change or presenting the change, do you see that kind of questioning or trying to get more information as helpful to the change, adaptability mindset? Or do you think that it backfires? Like, how do you feel about this?
Usually I'd say yes. I'd say as a leader in the organization, I always try to think through the messaging when we're announcing a change, so that hopefully I'm explaining the why, and I'm giving people the respect of that sort of like, here are the benefits, acknowledging perhaps some of the downfalls or what might go wrong, and what we're going to do to watch that and shift course if that does start to happen, where we hope it doesn't, right? If it's the 10% probability, but then it actually starts to happen, then what do we do? I feel comfortable with my leadership, and I would hope that I've created an organization. And I know this is much more about the person necessarily than the company, but I think CDW cultivates the kind of leader who's open to getting questions. Now, I think everyone has to exercise good judgment. You're going to not ask that question like in a snarky way in front of 200 of your peers. But if you genuinely, with curiosity, reach out and ask a question,
Yeah.
then you will get a respectful answer. And sometimes the answer might be, hey, Meg, I hadn't thought of that, but that's a very good point you make. And so now we need to consider if that changes, right? what we've been talking about today.
Yeah.
But I think it's always good to be able to share your thoughts and talk through those things. And that's what gets you to the end state, hopefully as a team.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's wonderful. Cecelia, how do
Yeah.
you feel about this? Do
Yeah,
you
go
have
ahead.
similar, do you believe similar things to what Tara was talking about?
I do. And I think some of a build is something to be aware of as well. You know, people and humans in general are adapted to try to simplify things, to have a routine, to conserve energy, right? We all do this, right? And so, when you get into a working situation, you try to create a structure and touch points and frameworks that you can use over and over again, and change threatens that every single time. And you almost have to be aware of this like evolutionary bias that we all have to feel threatened by that, but also recognize that if you don't change, if you don't unlearn success, that's an almost certain path to failure at work in the end, right? Where you see a lot of trouble is where you see people who really struggle to adapt and change, and they try to cling to those old ways. And so I think that awareness that each of us have an inclination to want to keep things in a very static or stasis level, that change is ultimately actually a security blanket. If you go through that, if you stay open to it, it actually helps you prevent kind of the thing that you're fearing, right? Which is instability, loss of something, right? Performance concerns. And so, yeah, I think that, that's something I always try to remember, because we all kind of naturally want to do that. If you're aware of it, it can help you get around it, right? And just be kind of, hey, this is just how I'm reacting. To your point, Tara, about reacting, it's another way to kind of walk it back. I do it too. I react, and then like, wait a second. Okay, take a deep breath here, think through it, be a little rational, and I usually come out the other side with an evolved view.
Yeah. Oh, I'm loving all of this. There's a ton of comments in the chat as well here. Valerie had shared that their previous manager would comment, she could upset my world, and I always came through for her, almost like a joke. And she used me as an example for change. And I think that's one of those things, like, my sisters are not good with change. I, on the other hand, because I'm the oldest and, trying to like lead the pack and whatever, like, I got to be really good with change, because everything changes. Like, I graduated into the worst job market in history. Any port in a storm, y'all. I think this is a very common refrain for a lot of people who are still in the job market. They've seen so much change, whether it's the last 5 years, the last 25 years, there's been a lot going on. Julie also commented that, Tara, your method and process kind of put that defensive shield down seems really good. It can kind of come up really easily. And that's a lot of people focused on what you had said, Cecelia, also, of trying to think about the potential positives of this, because it's fear-based, right? Our lizard brain likes to know what's happening. That's how it keeps us safe. So yeah, I think these are really, really great. We're diving in on a lot of psychology aspects to this. So awesome. Thank you so much. All right, let's talk about risk taking when it comes to situations of change, right? Because sometimes it's change that's imposed upon us, and other times it's change that we have to pursue ourselves. So do you have any advice for people that struggle with taking risks, or even assessing, trying to figure out, is this risk something that they can take or not? The person that asked this said, I struggle enormously when there's a financial implication to any sort of the risk that I'm taking. I also fully identify with this. So Cecelia, start us off here. Do you feel like you have gotten better at assessing and taking risks throughout your career? And if so, how do you think you did that?
Yeah, I have. I think I'm a fairly naturally risk averse person, which is funny because I co-founded a startup, right? But I did it in the least risky way as a founder in residence. So that's like a person with a salary who co-founds on a VC's behalf. It's a different equity model, but it's a lot less risky because you always have a job at the end of it. And so, I am a person who's not a very risky person, but over time, what I've really learned from other people is that if you are not taking risks, there is very little potential for growth. And so for me, it's really been almost like being an observer, kind of sitting back and watching risk play out and how people think about it. And then learning to kind of think that way myself and to be a little bit more objective about, kind of the cost benefit analysis to see, look, I have three options in front of me. There are different risk and benefit profiles. If I do not take any sort of risk, if I don't take any sort of, let's say, financial risk, there's an inherent risk on the other side that I actually have to see as well, which is, kind of lack of growth, right? And over time, I think you get better about weighing it. But the other thing I'll say is it gets easier with experience and confidence. And I think that's just a reality of gaining professional experience. A lot of things, including taking risks, get easier because you have a base of experience to draw from. You have people that you have learned from. And I think the last thing I'd say is it's really important, especially earlier in your career, to go find people who are more experienced than you to learn these things from. They are a font of information, and you can see a lot of things that people have been through. And while you'll probably still need to go through them, you may weather it better by asking about their stories, by learning from the ways that you see them operating, and by, again, kind of using that as you build your own confidence to navigate the waters.
Yeah. Ooh, I like this. Tara, how about you? Did you, is assessing and taking risks something that you have had to do in your career at all? How do you think that you've handled it, from the time you were starting out to now?
I think it's interesting. I agree wholeheartedly with what Cecelia said. I would say I often use the counter, like the term opportunity cost, which gets used a lot, especially in investing. Like, what's the opportunity cost if we don't do this? In Cecilia's example about, like, you miss the opportunity for growth, right? And so now, by perhaps not taking a risk, what you're doing is agreeing to, stay stagnant, and then you'll see other people around you either progressing in their careers or doing something that you thought was interesting, and you're like, well, I could have done that. You could have, but at some decision point you actively chose not to, and that's why you find yourself in this situation today. For the period of time at which I was, like, responsible for negotiating and managing contracts on behalf of CDW, I had a lot of risk evaluation tools at my disposal to talk to people about, and you get into quickly in that role where you're negotiating multiple contracts concurrently, like having this body of knowledge of what really goes wrong, right? You said you went to law school, you're contracting to mitigate all of these risks. And let's just use easy numbers and say there's like 50 things in the document that you wish you had. But there's really only 3 that ever actually go wrong. And over time, you start to figure out what those are, what the ones that actually cost the company money are that you want to put your energy into mitigating. And then you feel like you don't need to, you can roll the dice or be a little more risk tolerant in some other areas. And I think that's a good microcosm, like, example for a lot of different ways that you might think about risk in jobs or finances, of like, these are the core things that might actually go wrong. The rest of it is such a small, tiny percentage, it's really probably not worth your energy.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful point to make. These are situations where you need to, you can find ways that you have actually developed skills that help support adaptability. You just might not think of them in that kind of vein. You're as you're talking, I'm thinking, like, I'm part of the legal team at Power to Fly, so I help review contracts. And this is something that, like, the sales team talks about all the time, right? Of like, well, this thing has changed and the objective was supposed to be this, but now they're saying this and they're in their red lines. So maybe we need to change, like, maybe their focus for the partnership is different now, or they want to get something more out of it than what we were trying to sell. So yeah, having that adaptability is not, it's so usable in every aspect of your work, even if you're not in a field where you think that there's a lot of change happening.
Yeah.
Okay, we did have a question from the chat that I wanted to ask before we kind of moved on past it. Samson had asked, is it better to think of the benefits of change or of the cost or damage of staying constant when you're trying to convince a team to change? So I think this is really interesting, right? You're kind of thinking in terms of like a carrot or stick mentality. But if you are trying to convince a team, do you think that, at least in your experience, has one been more effective, or are they best used in tandem? Or maybe this isn't something that you utilize at all. Tara, how about you? What are you usually likely to lead with if you're trying to talk to or convince a team to change?
I mean, I think it's both. I try to be succinct because I feel like there's, if you're trying to lead another group through change, there's overselling your argument, right? So if you talk too much, then somehow that gives your arguments less weight. So it's a bit of a finite number of points, and I try to mix them up of like, here are the benefits, and generally this is the cost of not doing it. And as I said before, I feel like if there's a reasonably sized use case that we need to look out for, then there's kind of a closing of like, hey, but we're gonna watch this. We're gonna watch what happens as this change unfolds. And if at a point we see it going in a direction we don't like, we'll have an opportunity to course correct, right? Very few changes are irreversible or like can't at least be shifted somewhat, after that decision. So I think people just need to know that you have the fortitude to do that. And that's the thing, change is constant. So this isn't like one massive change and then nothing changes for a decade. It's going to keep changing every month, week, day in some cases. So
yeah, I agree. Cecelia, how about you?
I think that, like Tara said, you want to explain the logic to everybody and be really clear about the why. You also don't, you want to do it in a finite number of words so you're not defending it necessarily, because one important thing about being a leader is you're going to have to make change, and you're going to make people uncomfortable in doing it. It is a certainty that you will not bring everybody along with you. That is where your confidence in the change and your ability to weigh the risk and the rewards and the decision that you're making and make what you believe is the right choice is really critical, because you're going to do things people aren't going to be ready. If you kind of try to get everybody, to get, unanimous support, you're not going to. And so it is really important to lead confidently, but empathetically. And like Tara noted, listen and check in and refine. Right. And that's the thing. And that's why it's also, like you said, Tara, so important to say, we're going to talk about this. We're going to, agile is such a buzzword, but there's a reason everybody likes the idea of it. It's because you're checking in. And that's really what agile means. It means checking in. It means taking temperatures. It means adjusting your approach as needed. Yeah. And so if you're able to do that, if you as a leader are flexible and adaptable to that change you're trying to make, you can get people there, but you got to be ready for people to be grumpy a bit, and to lead empathetically, understanding there's grumpiness, understanding it's your job to push them through it, and having ways to be respectful of the team as you go forward.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This kind of threads that needle of what we were talking about earlier with the idea of kind of transparency within like the reasoning behind this or what we're hoping to gain from it. You're not really trying to, nor necessarily do you even really want to or have time to walk everybody through every single step of how the sausage is going to be made here. Because that's just obviously, like you talked about, opening up yourself to a lot of not necessarily criticism, but like everybody's going to want to be heard, and it's going to delay everything. So yeah, it is about kind of walking that fine line between transparency and cultivating that trust of your team in you or in whoever is actually making these decisions. I think that's wonderful. Julie is also loving your idea or tip of like, be ready for people to be grumpy. So I think that's hugely important. All right. So we have a lot of people that had questions about, this idea of adaptability, this idea of change in regards to changing their career. So transitioning from, one department to another, one industry to another. And a lot of people had questions about things like, getting their resume to catch the eye of a recruiter, that kind of thing. Tara, I want to hear from you on this. What do you think is key when somebody's changing careers and trying to get like breakthrough into a new industry or a new field?
Yeah, Meg, I would say what I've seen, and it can be different for different people, but in the spirit of adaptability, is that people could be changing careers, or they might be open to, let's say, 2 or 3 different careers. And so they're putting their name out there, they're putting out their resume for a couple of different roles in the same industry, or maybe a same sort of role across a couple of different industries. I think you've got to be like, put yourself in the shoes of the hiring manager and be adaptable and send the most relevant thing to that person. And so what catches my eye, and I think what catches a lot of people's eye, is like an intro paragraph or the old-fashioned cover letter, something that's personal, not like stalker look me up on Instagram kind of stuff, but just about my company, my role in the company, right? I'm the hiring manager. And then having a couple of versions of your resume that highlight the role that you're going for. So especially with today's applicants that probably have changed jobs a lot more than, say, their parents did. They're not going to have a resume with like 2 jobs on it. They might have 12 jobs on there. And so thinking about like, okay, I'm going for this project management role. I want to highlight the 3 or 4 jobs that had really important project management skill sets, and I'll put some details about those. And for those applications, the other jobs, I just have 1 bullet, like the title and what that job expected of me, and I kind of move past it. But if it's not project management and I actually have like development or communication skills, and that's what I'm going for, a DevOps role or some kind of BA or comms, then you flip the resume and make it more appropriate for that, and you just send the right one to the right people. And I think that kind of attention to detail and respect for the person's time. I mean, again, back in the olden days, I used to say, if it's more than a page, I'm throwing it out. Like, resumes literally came to my desk. So part of the problem with, I guess, social media and online resumes is that people have lost the art of brevity. Just like I wasn't going to read the 7-page thing that comes to my desk, I am not going to read your 7-page PDF either, regardless of how many pretty fonts you use. So
speaking from experience much?
Just saying.
Okay,
so
right. we all like discovered clip art and thought we were the coolest thing ever. I get it. This will stand out.
I had someone send me a video though, and I got to tell you that's very creative. And if you have the wherewithal, right? Some people don't have the confidence for that, but including a link to a video, especially because you're applying online and these URLs actually work and you can easily paste them into something, it can certainly be compelling. So
yeah, I love that. We have follow-up to this in the chat. This person had wanted to talk about, if you're trying to change gears in your career, most people are all, understandably worried about kind of starting at square one, both financially, professionally. If you're trying to adapt that previous experience to fit a new department, do you think there's any keys for being taken seriously when you know that you are up against people who have been in that field or in that department for their entire career trajectory? Do you think there are certain things that you really should highlight? Do you think there's a certain tack that you should take with it that's more successful?
Cecelia, do you have thoughts on that one?
I do. I think there's a couple of things that come to mind for me on that particular one. One is if you establish yourself as competent at a company that has lots of different departments or opportunity, they'll usually let you try things. And you won't have to start at square one. They won't demote you. They'll simply say, okay, we'll let you try. And that could be informal, where you lead something and people kind of see how you do. It could be more formal, where you move over. But I think that is very possible, more so than people realize. You can kind of, if you are competent and good at what you do, they want to keep you, and they usually want to give you some career pathing and opportunity. And most of the time, it's also helpful because internal companies tend to understand how skills align on certain roles. So unless you're going into something that requires very heavy skill and training, like let's say, you're in legal and you want to go be a developer, you're probably going to need to take some classes on the side before they take you seriously in that. But otherwise, there's a lot of ability to move. So I think that the other thing that I would just remind people of is most leaders, as they get to a higher level, are not experts in the things that they lead. It tends to be more about being able to lead, being able to think critically in the right way, being able to grow departments and organizations and functions. And so it's important to remember that, because as you want to try new things, remember that people are not experts. Even people at the top, they are not deep experts from a subject matter perspective in what they are leading. They know enough to
be able
navigate
to lead,
it, to be able to lead, and they know how to hire really great people to lead it and to give leverage to the team. But I think that's helpful as you're navigating career shifts yourself, because lots of people around you don't know all the answers or aren't deep subject matter experts in everything that they're doing. And you can be that too. You're not constrained to a choice that you made a few years ago or a decade ago or what have you.
Yeah, no, I think
Well,
that's
and
wonderful.
as Cecelia was talking, it popped in my head that if you're worried because you're applying for a role where there are people with a lot of tenure in that type of skill set, then you're going to highlight the parts of your career that give you reasonable capability in that skill set. But in a little bit of the turn that frown upside down, think about the things you have that those other people won't have. If they've had a really linear career path, then you've definitely got something in your history that allows you to look at problem solving from a different vantage point, or something else about your skill set that'll be tangential, but could turn out to be really valuable and interesting in that department for the diversity. I mean, diversity is a huge buzzword, but kind of like agile.
Well, diversity of background, diversity of thought is huge. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely been places,
styles, everything. Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely been places where I've been able to bring, like, not necessarily like legal, but like you talked about, like kind of risk assessment and like, hey, I see this potential problem. It might be this problematic, but probably what we're looking for at risk-wise is down here. And it's been a useful skill in trying to pitch like ideas that I've had, or evaluating like, hey, Chad had this really great idea. Like, it'd be super, we should listen to this, and here's why. So no, I think that's wonderful. And I really liked, Cecelia, what you had said about storytelling, right? Because that was something, like, I'm 36, so not dinosaur, but also very much not a young whippersnapper. And I was never taught in school to think of it like a story, right? It just wasn't the way we thought about these things. It was more about like making sure your formatting was fine and all that. So when you think about it more in terms of that story, you do get to use something like your cover letter. Like that's one of the things that was never really explained very well, is that you're not really trying to like impress somebody with what you have. Like, yes, that's true. But if you are in a transition or trying to like make a switch, you're trying to connect those dots for the hiring manager or for the person that's going to, like, be your supervisor or whatever. So instead of thinking of it as like, I need to tell them all the great things about myself, think of it in terms of like, what dots are they maybe not going to be able to connect? What context is important that they're not going to be able to pull from your resume? So that way you can make that, like, you're not trying to let them like find the path themselves. You're trying to get them to follow the breadcrumbs you are laying throughout your, these docs or this information you're sending them. All right. I wanted to talk a little bit as well about when it comes to having a background at a small company, but transitioning to a larger company. So have either of you had experience with this? Cecelia, I want to know what it's like to try and change your mindset when it comes to like even just the size of the organization.
Yeah, I definitely have gone through that shift. And, so the venture capital firm I was at was probably 50 people, something like that, small, relatively small. And then of course, when I co-founded a startup, it was me, and, got bigger, but the, company of one. And so, in those circumstances, you have so much control over decision making. There's very little red tape. There's very little socialization. Politics are fairly limited. So then you go to a larger organization, and navigating that change can be a real culture shock. And so, I think as you think about it, you have to think about yourself and how you're going to navigate the change and feel about the change. That's really important, right? Is that larger company going to feel like a challenge for you. How are you going to adapt and change for that? But then the other thing is, how do you make yourself sellable to a larger company, or vice versa, frankly? And what I will say is that, again, it's all about telling that story, and about showing the types of, if you're at a small company, that hands-on experience you've had leading functions that it would otherwise be hard for you to have, at such a diverse level. You just get to try many other functions, departments, and things at a smaller company. You encounter them a lot more quickly. And so that can bring a broader view to a larger company where people are sometimes more specialized. You can really show that off. And, the secret is, both large companies and small companies like the opposite experience in their ranks. So there's a lot of value, where big companies are like, oh, I really like that they have that little company experience. They've had a lot of control. They've had to think very broadly, more like a general manager, right? They've had to really think about running the business versus just kind of being responsible for their area. Whereas, if you're going to a smaller place, those big companies carry a ton of weight on your resume. And people, oh, well, they did such and such at this place. That's really a big deal, right? Because you get scale at a big company and you get breadth at a small company. And so I would just say, don't feel like one or the other is a hindrance. It's actually not. But again, you have to tell the story in the right way. You have to adapt it, to Tara's point about, you got to take your resume, you've got to tell the specific story you think is going to resonate, to indicate why your diversity of experience is an asset to the organization versus a liability or lack of understanding.
Yeah, no, I love this. This is great advice. We only have about 10 minutes left, so I do want to try and get to as many questions as we can. But if you do have a question you'd like to ask, please feel free to keep putting it in the chat. Let's see. Okay, this one's a really good question. How can you grow or improve your adaptability to change when you are in the same kind of, if your tasks or your job is very routine, very, kind of a pattern that gets set in, and that's what you have to do. I have been in a number of roles that did this. One was quite literally on a factory setting, so no room for wiggle there. But let's talk about how to adapt to change when you don't really have to see change that often. Tara, you had talked about kind of starting with small changes that you could make for yourself. Do you have anything else that you want to add to that?
Yeah. So I think about this as, like, if you're in a large company, you probably have a piece of a process, right? And so the easiest move for you is to go either up or down the chain on that process, right? And so whether you're able to actually change your role and say, hey, I'd like to, switch steps in the factory line that you're working in, Meg, or you just to say, like, I like to shadow Cecelia for half a day and like learn about the parts before they come to me, right? So that's usually a pretty easy one. And to Cecilia's point, I think people are afraid to ask about these things, but generally I mean, leaders are glad to have you learn this and get more perspective on how your job impacts the whole. So I can't imagine a lot of people denying that as an ask. Yeah. In most companies, you also have an opportunity to get on project groups, or, if you're in a relatively small company, or you feel like the place that you work now isn't interested in investing in you, then unfortunately, that's sad. That says a lot of negative things about that place, which is maybe why you're looking for a job. But there are a lot of online resources. The resume thing came from me helping my son like make one master resume and say, okay, but now you don't send this 4-page resume to everybody. You only send the parts that are relevant to each person, but you only had to write it once, and it's this big long thing that you now chop up. Likewise with one of my other children, it was, okay, well, you can go on a Cloud Guru or Udemy or some of these other places, LinkedIn Learning, and you can get relatively inexpensive subscriptions to get some online training. If what you need to do is like shore up your Microsoft Office skills or something, or you need to learn ServiceNow, or whatever, especially in the technology world, there's so much available to you. And barring all that, even if your means are so slim that you can't afford to do that, YouTube is incredible. You can get videos about almost anything. Watch some TED Talks, do that. Like, just feel like you take that time to invest in yourself. And I think that helps you build the confidence to be able to think about other tasks you might do. And I think it's okay to just try to do your task a bit differently. Like there's nothing that I'm going to wager there's very little in this world that cannot be improved. So if you just take a continuous improvement mindset,
there's
and
always
you take
going to
the
be a
task
better
you're doing,
mousetrap, right?
right? And you start playing with it a little and have some experimentation where, some of the stuff it might be like, well, that didn't really make it better. And it took me 5 minutes longer. So, knock that one out. But you've got to give yourself permission to try those things a little bit. And in that like microcosm of the space that you inhabit, you will feel better about yourself and you'll realize that you've expanded your knowledge, even if no one else knows it yet. And I think that's really like key to building your confidence.
Yeah. Ooh, loving this. Okay, we've got a little under 5 minutes. I'm going to ask one more question. I usually say 5 minutes at the end to talk solely about CDW. We'll go to that in a second here. But I want to talk about, we're going to do popcorn. So like super short answer from each of you. What was something that was a change that you encountered during the pandemic that evoked a shift in the way you communicate with others? I've heard a lot of stories about this, but I want to know what it was like for each of you. So what was that like, 2 sentences or less? Tara, do you want to go first?
Sure. I've always been at what you might call a remote coworker for CDW. So I was always on calls with people constantly, but not video calls 8 hours a day. And not being able to have meetings and sort of recording videos and then thinking about like always being on camera was really at first very difficult for me to deal with. Like I didn't appreciate. It's like, what happened to just calling somebody? Could you please just
it's weird.
type the
It's
someone
the first
just
time
please
you
just call me.
Yes. Video chatting was not a thing at my last office, and I didn't even work with my team. And it was always like a phone call or somebody would come to my desk.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's huge. Cecelia, how about you? What was the biggest shift for you communication wise for COVID?
Yeah, so I have been in distributed organizations with video calls for almost 10 years. So that was easy for me. But I had my son at home for a year from daycare, starting at 18 months when the pandemic hit. And that meant I had to be very transparent about the fact that I had an 18-month-old at home with 2 working parents. I am still not sure how that year happened. It was very
necessity
difficult.
is the mother of invention, right?
Yes, it was very difficult. We got through it. He got through it. But yeah, it was it required, I think, honesty, transparency, and openness about, hey, this is going on. This is part of the package of me that needs to be okay, right? And it needs to be okay. And I need grace and support from you. Normally, pre-pandemic, I think we were maybe a bit more afraid to ask for that.
Yeah, I think that was the one thing we talked about a ton at Power to Fly, with with clients and on calls like this. It's working from home and having that window into people's houses. It doesn't make you less professional. It makes you more practical and gives you a fuller view of who your employees are, who your teammates are when they're not in that cubicle at the end of the hall. And it really did give us the opportunity to just be more realistic with like what is demanded of us in our daily lives and what people can accomplish and what needs maybe a slight change or slight tweak as we go. All right, I want to talk a little bit about this slide you're seeing in front of you. These are some questions that we asked of Tara and Cecelia prior to today's session. I want to talk about your top tips for someone who's interviewing. So Cecelia, do you want to lead us off here?
Yeah, I would just say it's that personalization of what you're able to do and looking beyond the specific roles that you did and the skills underneath them and the capabilities underneath them. Because most of the time, it's really about selling your capabilities to an organization. Most of the other specific stuff can be learned and almost has to be learned because companies operate so uniquely to themselves that they really want to see that you're adaptable, to use the buzzword of the day, that you're flexible and that you have capabilities that allow you to pick things up quickly. And so that's really the story that I sell on myself, but that I also want to see out of others.
Yeah, like that. Tara, what about you? What about this? Do you think is like the one thing people should take from this this tip from you today?
Yeah, I agree with Cecelia. I needed a different tip. So I said the other thing is to ask great questions to show that you did, a modicum of research about the company that you're applying at, that you're not just firing out resumes to everybody on the internet. And so asking really good questions and like demonstrating a curiosity and a learning agility really catches people's attention. And I would say that, that would help you in an interview, stand apart from other people who maybe ask like, well, when do you need someone to start? No other questions. Those are
Yeah.
fairly benign. You're looking for someone with a bit more thought-provoking question than that.
Yeah, I like that. Well, to both of you, Tara and Cecelia, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be here with us. Y'all came prepared, obviously more than prepared for these questions, and we're so, so happy to see it. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been lovely to spend the last hour learning from both of you.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Happy to have you. And then huge thank you as well to our attendees, to our audience members. These events don't happen without you. My job doesn't exist without you. So thank you all for taking the time to spend with us today. Y'all brought some amazing questions. I was loving the participation we got to see in the chat. That's going to bring us to the end of time today. However, we really hope that you'll join us for events coming up in the future. We've got some great programming next week. And if this was either your first visit to Power to Fly or your 100th, we're so, so happy to have you here with us. Have a safe, happy, healthy rest of your Thursday, and we can't wait to see you again soon. Bye, everybody.